Okay. All right. Yeah, we can get going. And so yeah, I'm here more in sort of for support and to hand things off to our session facilitator Corey. But just a couple of things to note at the start. Just kind of some ground rules that we like to establish before we get the sessions going. So be sure that your Zoom name reflects your first and last name, your place of work, and if you'd like as well your preferred pronouns. Please remain muted unless called upon or engaging in breakout room conversation. Try to use the raise hand feature to let the host know that you would like to speak. And then, of course, you can also use the chat for questions and comments. Don't interrupt others. Please come to the conversation from a place of respect and kindness. And note that, of course, these sessions are also being recorded and they will be shared on our website following the gathering. And I will put that link also into the chat. And now I'm going to turn it over to Corey to guide us through tipping the scales here and accessing capital. So thanks, Corey, and it's all yours.
Great, thank you so much, Jake. Appreciate that, Caitlin, as well. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to our session this morning, Tipping the Scales, creative and hopefully thoughtful, we added approaches to capital in what can be a challenging lending landscape. Some of you might have caught this session. We were also at National Farm Viability a few weeks ago as well. So if that's the case, greetings once again. There are maybe a couple of updates here, but otherwise we are sort of giving an encore performance today. So put simply, we're going to talk a bit about some of the capital tools and services that we here at BCLF commonly engage with, sort of framed from our perspective as both business advisors, myself and lenders, which I'm joined by Emma here today. She's a loan officer here. And sort of when we're working with clients and also framing that from the perspective of what barriers exist in our sort of underserved and what we like to call underestimated business communities. We also sort of hope to offer some considerations and strategies in order to put you, if you are a proprietor yourself or your client, depending on what sort of operation or vantage that you are coming from, their best foot forward when they're seeking out a variety of funding sources. But just to be clear, we are sort of going to focus on a lot of the work that we do here. So I think we're going to pop in a poll quickly, Caitlin, if we can get that up there. And this is just to sort of gauge who we're speaking with today. We were able to see briefly the attendees list, but that may have changed since last we checked. And we just kind of want to get a pulse on the sort of nature of your backgrounds in the audience, just to sort of help frame that conversation. Here we go. Oh, wow. This is the first time I've seen a poll on this end before. And it's like kind of like it's like being at the races. It's very interesting. Not that I've watched many horse races in my life either. Okay. So this kind of looks like, there's some more people kind of clocking in here. The majority of folks here look like they are from nonprofit technical assistance or other sorts of business support environment, which is very much sort of the focus, I think, that we've tried to kind of nail down in this conversation. So that's great. Good to have alignment there. So I'm just going to share the results here. Or you have already, someone has. And some lending institutions as well. So this is going to be great. So we're just going to move on here for our next slide. So I imagine, just being the nature of the sort of smallness of Vermont itself, that many of you are already familiar with us as an organization, perhaps not us as individuals, but the Vermont Community Loan Fund is a mission-driven community development financial institution, which is often abbreviated as CDFI, that's located within the unceded Abenaki territory, otherwise known as Montpelier, Vermont. Just for some background, we provide loans, resources, and a sort of suite of advisory support to a spectrum of local businesses. That includes the farm and food business spheres, but also includes community organizations and nonprofits, early care and learning providers, and also developers of affordable housing. So it really runs the gamut. But the sort of tie that binds here is that we tend to focus on applicants and potential borrowers that either don't qualify for or have been rejected for a loan from a traditional lender. So our niche is in developing and promoting sort of innovative capital-based solutions to our local entrepreneurial community. And here, it's a nice little picture of Vermont here, of Montpelier. There's the capital, and this is our team, or most of our team, represented here, massed up outside of our new building. We just moved not that long ago, but a little introduction here. My name is Corey, and I'm one of 3 business advisors within the fund's Business Resource Center, which we provide some of that direct advisory support that I mentioned before. So we sort of offer prospective, current, and former borrowers a host of services, which includes financial planning, operations management, insights and analysis, and also a sort of suite of tools that we build in-house. And so for some additional context, my direct farm management experience, I do have some of that, and that lies primarily in the greenhouse floriculture industry. But I've also worked from a variety of other sort of business vantages as well in my career, which includes perishables distribution and seafood wholesale and distribution as well, which was from another life back when I lived in New York. But I am just sort of, as a, I guess that little tidbit here, I think I'm happiest in terms of the work that I'm engaged with here when I'm doing that sort of direct client interface. And I think I really enjoy the problem solving aspects of my job as well, and sort of clients coming directly to us for very specific needs, very granular and industry specific needs. So it provides an opportunity for learning for me, seeing as I kind of have a more sort of narrow, I think, small business background. But I think it also sort of helps to have, that relationship building piece there as well. But I will admit that one of the best things about the work that I do, especially in non-COVID times, is being able to get out there and be able to see the operations that we kind of support and really engage with people one-on-one. And I hope that we can kind of do that more at some point. But in the meantime, I suppose this is a pretty good substitute, all things considered. So I'm joined today by my wonderful colleague, Emma Enoch, who is a loan officer here at BCLF. And Emma has a passionate bent for economic justice, which I think is a perfect complement to this conversation today. Emma provides lending support and services to both prospective and current borrowers in her client portfolio, but she also has a lot of experience and enthusiasm working specifically with our Vermont farm and food business community. Prior to her work here at BCLF, she held several positions in food security, land use management, and environmentally focused project management. But I just want to give a moment here to Emma, and what makes you happiest about your work here, since I got to give my spiel, Emma.
Thanks for the intro, Corey, and thanks for everyone for having us. I think that's an easy one. Being able to talk to our prospective borrowers during the application process and the underwriting process, and getting in deep about their dreams and their goals and what they envision for their business, and we get meta about how it will in turn just like influence all of Vermont and the local economies, and going through that process, and then hopefully after loan closing, visiting them a few months later and just actually seeing it all in a very tangible way is really gratifying for them, really gratifying for me. Yeah, I think that's my favorite part.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think it's also really sort of important to highlight as well that we do a lot of work together, our 2 departments, so the loan team and the Business Resource Center as well. And I think that's a kind of, I hope that it's going to offer a sort of interesting perspective as we sort of talk about some of these things. Okay, moving on. And so one of the things that we sort of outlined in our title slide, more about those challenges that we mentioned. Let's kind of set up the conversation here. And there's also a little bit of a corny pun in here, but I'm not going to apologize for that. But so given the provenance of this conference in particular, the Farm to Plate gathering, and the poll results as well, I think it may be safe to say that we all understand and are very much vested in the prosperity of farms and food systems, food businesses, and sort of the larger economic landscape, and the humans which rely upon them to persist, frankly. And so while I'd be willing to venture that most of us didn't get into agriculture or some sort of corollary to agriculture to flex our financials game, these skills are really important. And I know that we all understand that, but it also can't be understated, I feel like. Because these systems, as we all are aware, require capital infusion, the business acumen, and also the personal bandwidth of their proprietors in order to be sustainable. And that's often an evasive sort of trifecta that we see in our clients and ourselves, right? As consultants, farmers, and farm managers, and food business entrepreneurs, oftentimes. And sort of complicating matters, I think that it's safe to say that we do not live in a strictly merit-based society. And it should come as no surprise to anyone that those with access to buffer income tend to fare better in our economic system, just sort of by nature of the fact that they're better insulated against risk. But we must also acknowledge, I feel like, that these systems are unfairly stacked against so many of us in our communities. So bolstering the food system and supporting new and existing generations of engaged producers, regardless of socioeconomic circumstances, and I would say even perhaps in spite of it, is a crucial element of creating lasting change for both our food system as a static sort of enterprise and for the benefit and the viability of economic pathways for our communities as well. And so I think it's important to note that we have some important hurdles and considerations here, many of which are applicable across the business sphere and even in larger cultural landscapes, I'd argue. And I think we're going to kind of touch upon that as well as we kind of move through this. I'm just looking at the slide here, just to, some of these sort of challenges that many businesses face. It's just that access to capital piece, which, we kind of really hope to kind of play a part of here, right? That's kind of the reason why we're here. And then there's also, a whole suite of other challenges, which I'm sure many of you are also engaged with as well. But particular to some of the advisory work that we do here as well, we hope to sort of be able to be active in those conversations with clients and, by virtue of that, the food system at large, in sort of helping develop and foster some of these skills that are sort of crucial to the success of any enterprise, but particularly ones that are maybe a little bit more vulnerable as well. People are coming from a variety of backgrounds. And yeah, again, that's something else we'll touch upon as we go on. And just to be clear here, this access to capital piece too, I think that really goes beyond just the financial piece sometimes. It can be a challenge for folks to access the human capital, right? The skilled labor, the sort of aggregated, knowledge base as well that comes along with owning a business. And I think these kinds of opportunities that we're engaged with here are really great venue to be able to share that knowledge because we all are coming from these different backgrounds, and it's just super fascinating. And I think we're both very honored to be here and be able to contribute to that and part of that conversation. And, obviously that's reciprocal as well. Lastly, going back to that little pun there, this is just a little reminder that in my humble opinion, aquaculture is also agriculture. And this is actually taken by a news organization out on the east end of Long Island, who with an oyster farmer out in Mauritius Bay. And this is just a really cool picture, I thought, of some oyster float culture. Just wanted to share there. Okay, so just sort of expanding upon some of those challenges and sort of establishing that these become even more magnified when evaluating the history and even the current state of affairs in the capital access sphere, particular to BIPOC, low wealth, and women identified, owned and led businesses within our communities, which, to be clear, are sort of categories which we kind of were working with because it's things that we can find data on as well. And these are circumstances that are probably already quite familiar to many folks here. And sort of, especially those who kind of are coming from the lending spheres as well, thinking about kind of like redlining and things like that, issues that are becoming, thankfully, more and more a part of this conversation in finance. Also, we have a link to some more information on that at the end of this presentation if anyone's interested in talking more about that. But since we're not talking about mortgages here, we are talking about business capital access. And so Deserts and Oases here at the top of this slide is referring to a 2014 post-Great Recession study that was conducted by the National Community Reinvestment Coalition. And this sort of corroborated these severe recession impacts, which illuminated a sharply disparate access to credit outcomes for the smallest businesses. And that was, I think, less than $1 million in annual revenue in our national business landscape. So it wasn't particular to Vermont, it was a national study. But this pertained especially to those in rural economies, especially in the South and the Midwest, but over and above upon Black owned and operated businesses. But even if you dive into some of the Fed's research as well, you will see that this extends to women-owned businesses oftentimes as well. Because on average, BIPOC and women-led businesses receive less financing, less often, and at higher rates than their white male counterparts, even when controlled for things like creditworthiness, age, and the size of financing request. And just as a little sidebar, this even extends to online lending platforms where you might think, I guess, that some of the implicit bias factors would be diminished, but these outcomes show that that's actually not the case sometimes, oftentimes. But pertinent to this slide, there's a little bit of cause and effect here. That's what an arrow is good for. Just sort of stating that differential treatment tends to lead to differential outcomes, right? You get out what you put in. And so people who sort of engage from our underserved communities with this system oftentimes face things like more scrutiny. And that could come in the form of, active discouragement, depending on the lending individual or institution that you're working with. Not to put that on blast, but I think that we all are aware of the sort of historic precedents that exist there. But this can also just be a matter of being discouraged by having been denied in the past. Your own personal experience is tied up in this, because I think as small business owners and people who engage with the small business community, we're all very much aware that the identity piece is inextricable oftentimes from that sort of business interface. And there's a lot of sort of personal humanity that goes into these interactions. And so you can get burned, right? Just like in any sort of experience in your life, it can inform your willingness or your ability to engage these systems in the future. And something else to consider too, again, depending on the institution, you could be steered to different products based upon, your background or how you present to somebody in this world, depending on, that person's agenda or where they're coming from, to put that in a way. So that can also sort of influence your ability and your sort of opportunity to engage with these systems. Okay. I think it's just important to acknowledge and sort of be intentional in our lending and our advisory work, because it's really the only way that we can sort of try and interrupt these cycles of bias. Because I think, as people, again, engaged in the business community, and there are multiple studies that are out there that that can show, two of these that are here, that how profitable a business is, or how much capital a business has to operate with its startup, especially, I think, directly correlates to these long-term outcomes for viability. And this is just a sort of empirical corollary here to the previous slide. first off, just sort of fully owning the demographics of Vermont as being the second whitest state in the union. This data does sort of mirror the national findings, to kind of set the precedent here. But this is a survey that we conducted in-house that was in the spring of 2021, specifically to reach BIPOC and women-led organizations operating small businesses in the state of Vermont. For just some more context, this is a part of a sort of internal fact-finding mission that we conducted here for a new loan product that we're going to be offering. But without getting too deep into the survey methods here, we polled over, I think, 1,000 Vermont entrepreneurs and organization leaders that identified as BIPOC or women-owned and/or women-owned. And I think we had about a 7% response rate on this. But you can sort of clearly see here, thanks to some great infographics from Alina, who is our Director of Business Resources here, that fear of denial and experiences of not being understood by lenders when engaging in the process were sort of paramount obstacles when pursuing a loan or approaching an institution for a loan for those in those communities. So owning that this is a sort of huge, complex conversation that deserves a way more thorough and sort of fair laid analysis than we really are capable of doing here. I think that we just wanted to sort of include this slide here as a sort of a local correlation here that sort of, acknowledges that these have sweeping implications for our small business communities, ones that we really hope to continue to serve. And so it's just a crucial part of this conversation, especially when we're talking about things like barriers to entry. Conveniently, barriers to entry here. So getting a little bit more specific about some of the things that we're talking about here. These are just some roadblocks that we have kind of outlined. But so on a larger cultural scale, this has very sort of granular implications, I think, but it also can be sort of extrapolated, I think, across a very wide lens. But these are just some sort of roadblocks that are commonly experienced by new entrepreneurs. And it can be, honestly, at any stage in the sort of life of your business as well. I don't think it's just limited to that. But I think it is also, it's particularly pertinent to the conversation around underserved business communities when they're trying to engage with these capital systems. And yeah, just a little bit of cheekiness there. But so some of the specifics, the personal net worth piece, one of those challenges can really just be around, how many assets you have, what sort of collateral you have to be able to put up against a financing request. There's also this sort of elephant in the room, this real monolith of the sort of inaccessibility these days of housing, that sort of increasingly evasive home ownership piece, which was sort of the traditional hallmark of wealth building among sort of the low wealth and even middle class communities, right? That was one of the primary vehicles for upward mobility that is becoming increasingly difficult to sort of access. But this also can relate to things like education and experience. And so I think that there's something to be said for people who come from generational businesses who sort of inherit a built-in system. And that may require some changes, right? Or, a business needs to be responsive. It needs to continue to grow. But that also comes with a general fluency a lot of times of inheriting a business where you've grown up, you've been raised within that framework, within that set of structures. And so maybe you are better equipped to be able to negotiate some of these complex systems, whereas somebody that's coming in as a new business owner, as a new entrepreneur, may experience some real resource challenges there. There's other resources that I think Vermont is actually really great at sort of providing a lot of new business entrepreneurs, particularly in the agricultural and food business spheres. The technical assistance piece is huge, but there are people who don't know that it exists too. And so I think, networks like this and these sorts of opportunities to be able to sort of kind of network here and get those messages out there and understand what sort of resources are available to the business community is huge. But yeah, we can always do better, right? And so the last piece here is just this sort of, the last piece on this slide is the sort of lender qualitative assessment piece, which is a kind of it's for people who are sort of very not indoctrinated or sort of involved in capital or particularly lending, systems lending, understanding what that sort of qualitative piece looks like, because I think it can look like a lot of different things depending on who you're engaging with. And so I know Emma's going to talk a bit more about this as we move on, because this is definitely pertinent to the work that she does, but just sort of understanding that qualitative assessment piece, as opposed to doing something like basing your lending off of a strict rubric, kind of has a lot of benefits, but then there can also be some other implications there as well. But so just the moral of the story here is that, again, going back to that larger cultural scale piece, is that I think the wealthy, and we could probably also say the white here, are sort of really good at asking for help and navigating a system. And so you might even say sort of being able to sort of grease the wheels oftentimes as well, because it was kind of a system that was built to serve that demographic, right? And so many of us have been weaned within this culture that reinforces this kind of entitlement, for lack of a better term, or just to name that, which is much to the contrary for underserved communities that are largely expected to pick themselves up by the bootstraps, with a big sigh there. Something that I think we hear a lot of in the national conversation, despite the obvious irony there in the sort of physics of that enterprise. But sort of, I think just sort of being, the entitled or the people who are the most engaged or are the best served by these systems can often be the ones that, sort of own this sort of virtue of hard work sometimes. And that's very much, I think, in direct contrast to the people that are like, that are out there really trying to make the best out of their own situations and build wealth for themselves. So there's a lot of irony there, and I won't talk about Elon Musk here. So I'm just going to move on. Sorry, I see some laughter there. I'm glad. A little bit of a touch point for me. Okay, so just to kind of lay this out there here, I think we've sort of briefly set the stage in terms of some of these hurdles. May have bumbled through that a little bit. It's early, I apologize. But we're also going to talk about, Emma's kind of going to take the reins, I think, in the next couple of slides here to talk more about the work that we do here, which is right down to brass tacks, the commercial term loans and lines of credit, and sort of defining some of the differences between traditional lenders and CDFIs, which is, she'll talk a little bit more about that, as well as just some other pieces as we move along here, which kind of include just different sorts of capital tools that I think a lot of our clients engage with, particularly, again, to the farm and food business spheres here. And also just to sort of touch upon what advisors and other business support professionals can do to sort of support their clients through the process of trying to access these systems, and even through things like the application process. So yeah, I think I'm going to sort of turn this over to Emma now, and she's going to kind of talk a little bit more about these specific products that we engage with here.
Thanks, Corey. Yeah, so in thinking about the title of this presentation, Creative and Thoughtful Approaches, the concept of loans is not super creative. It predates all of us. So chat a little bit more about the creative approaches here. Here at VCLF, we offer loans and lines of credits. We have 4 relative programs: business lending, early care and learning lending, community development lending, and affordable housing. I work within the business lending and early care and learning. So first and foremost, and this speaks to if you're a business advisor advising a business owner, or if you're a business owner, the most important thing is to just know your ask, and then you can know what tools are available for what you need. Loans and lines of credits are actually fairly different and used for different purposes. So it's important to know what you need. You can approach a lender and not necessarily know if a term loan or a line of credit is what you need, but speaking for myself and some others in the industry, it's startling and understandable when a business owner comes to us and says, "Well, I don't really know how much I need, how much can you give me?" That's very understandable, and it's also a little bit of a red flag for us. We always sort of walk through folks and come up with a plan, but if you can just right off the bat, either with a business advisor or yourself, just come up with a plan. So just to dip our toes a little bit in the differences of a term loan and a line of credit, a term loan is like a one-time use fund. It's one pile of money, typically for one purpose. Here at VCLF, we oftentimes will fund a whole project, and then that will involve different breakdowns, but it's all part of one lump sum of money. These are great loans. These are great products because the payments are fixed. It's really fairly easy to project debt service, to know how much you're going to owe on a monthly basis. So when you're trying to establish cash flows, this is a pretty steady, grounded form of funding. Lines of credit we like to refer to as reusable funds. They serve the purpose of a credit card, except interest rates are oftentimes much, much, much lower. And then that's also on an annual term. You'll find that whether you're working at a CDFI or a traditional bank, that oftentimes you'll have the funds available to you for a year, and then you'll have to pay them down like a balloon payment, rest it for 30 days, and then it'll be available to you again, hopefully. Oftentimes people use lines of credit we always say it's great if you're a farmer or food entrepreneur to have a line of credit available to you. If your business is seasonal, if you need money during the preparatory season, it's great to have a line of credit available. Line of credits are also great as emergency cash reserves, but only if you're truly able to use it as an emergency cash reserve. Oftentimes it's a little tricky when folks do dip into that as a reserve, and then that balloon payment comes and it's hard to pay back. And sometimes at CDFIs, there's a bit more flexibility. We can extend it or term it out. It gets a little bit more tricky at banks, but those are the very high level general differences between a line of credit and a term loan, which we always just try to let folks know because they're really different. Oftentimes people will have both though, because they do serve different purposes. So just know that both are available to you if you have the need.
I just want to ask Emma quickly, because this is something, the line of credit was really important in the management of the greenhouse, right? So in my previous life, that was something that we relied upon really heavily to sort of bridge the gap between seasons, where it mostly relied upon just buying ahead for the next season. So buying hard goods, buying potting soil in bulk quantities, being able to even things like make payroll, right? Like it's a great tool for that. But there were a few times, despite having a pretty good growth trajectory and decent sales, and that there were years where it was more difficult than others to be able to make that balloon payment at the end of that, that season, right? So and come August, there could be a scramble to be able to pay that off so that we could renew that line of credit because it was essential. But what are the consequences to that if you are not able to kind of, make good on those terms?
It depends on which institution you're working with, and different institutions will offer or be able to offer creative solutions, might I say. Here at VCLF, we can essentially do one of two things: extend it. So extend it 60 days, 90 days, and hope that within that amount of time, the business owner is able to sort of bolster some reserves to be able to pay that down. Another option is to just term it out, make it into a term loan. That would eliminate the option to renew the line of credit, which is unfortunate, but that is a sort of a best of the worst case scenario, is turning it into a term loan.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Sorry to jump in there. And folks as well, if you have questions, I can see the chat. So if there are any things that, even if we can't get to it in situ, we will definitely have time at the end as well. Sorry, Emma.
Thank you for switching. That's great. So here I'm just going to chat a little bit about the differences between a CDFI and a traditional bank. I know I've been throwing around acronyms. We nonprofits love that. So a CDFI is a community development financial institution. It's a U.S. Treasury designation. BCLF is a CDFI. Credit unions are CDFIs. Venture capital funds are CDFIs. So they all fall under the umbrella of some people refer to us as risk capital, but we are mission-based, typically nonprofit. We can take risks where more traditional banks can't or won't. CDFIs are kind of like truer. Well, first and foremost, I will just say there's no bad blood between CDFIs and traditional banks. So I just want to preface all that I'm saying with that. Oftentimes a measure of success for us and our business owners is if someone can become bankable. So if somebody comes to us and for whatever reason don't qualify for a traditional loan, whether that's limited profit or limited credit history or poor credit history, oftentimes business owners will be able to pay off our loan or work with us and then build their credit or build their business enough for a bank to give them a loan. And we love it when that happens. So that's all to say we're different kinds of institutions. CDFIs are more members of the communities that they serve. So we can sort of have the long range, the long view vision of what a business will contribute to the community, to the local economy. So our process is a little more involved. We don't work within matrices. Typically the fees are, there are less fees. Interest rates are a little higher. This is, I think, something that sometimes comes as a shock to some folks. When we say our interest rate is 6%, other CDFIs in Vermont go up to 7, 8, 9%. That's pretty high. But we do that because we're taking a little bit more risk where a bank wouldn't. So it kind of tips the scale there. So that's the overall difference. We also we don't do private loans or mortgages. So we really can only lend to established businesses. And here in Vermont, VCLF can only lend to Vermont-based businesses. I will just, before we move to the next slide, give a shout out. Some other CDFIs in Vermont are VITA, Vermont Economic Development Association, and Community Capital Vermont. I know both organizations have representatives here on the call, so it's great to see you. Yeah, that's a really high, rough overview of the differences.
And just quickly as well, I just wanted to just jump in there quick, Emma, and just say, like, another thing that I think kind of sets some financial institutions apart as well is organizations like us is having sort of in-house other services available as well. Like particularly in, not to be like, well, there's us in BRC, but there is this sort of, there is a piece to that that may be a little bit different than a traditional lender would be able to offer in terms of being able to help even prepare for a loan application in a way that sort of helps support the business in the process in terms of just like general viability. But I will shut up now. So.
No, that's a really great point. And that's something that I was going to chat a little bit about here, is that establishing a long-term relationship with the business owner is really what we do. So sometimes when a business owner approaches us with an idea, we chat with them a little bit. If we get the sense that they're not quite sure how much they need, or they could use a bit of shepherding on their cash flows or projections or tighten up their balance sheet, we are able to refer them to our in-house specialists like Corey to make them feel really confident about the loan application that they're putting forth. So something we do acknowledge and talk about as a team here all the time is how vulnerable it feels to approach a lending institution. And as Corey really skillfully stated, the barriers are sometimes debilitating. The fear alone of being denied or showing a lender what you may not know is pretty intimidating, and we know that. And on behalf of our capitalistic society, I do want to apologize for that. So we do try to make it a bit more of a personal experience here. So the process is a bit longer than if you were working with a bank. We tend to ask for what we call like an application packet. So when you're prepping for either a term loan request or a line of credit request, we'll want to see a business plan of some sort, which includes who you are, why you do it, where you want to go, and what your exit plan is. We also will ask for a gambit of financial projections, historical projections, historical profit and loss statements, taxes, personal taxes. We'll also run a credit report. This is another point of intimidation, I would say. And I just want to state that when a lender asks you about your credit report, at least from the point of VCLF and other CDFIs in Vermont, it's really just to understand the story. Pretty much when we bring your loan request to our committees, we're trying to represent you and your story. So the whole application process and underwriting process, at least from where I stand, is just understanding the story of who you are in your business, which includes your personal financials, which can feel really vulnerable. I don't know of a loan that has been denied here at VCLF based on someone's credit history. We understand why credit scores are really low, and we understand that oftentimes it's not somebody's fault. So really when we dig into those questions, it's just to understand what the story is. That's basically sort of what underwriting looks like. So that's what we're doing when you don't hear from us for a week or two, is we're digging into the story. We're collecting data and reading your numbers, and then we'll come back to you with questions if we have any. But yeah, that's pretty much what we do here.
Yeah, and I just think that like it's such a great, like being able to include that narrative piece in the work that you do and in the analysis is just, it's just so crucial. It's also great as advisors to be a part of that process as well, because it helps us sort of establish relationships with those businesses and get some background information as well, and sort of just have, you know, some alternative perspectives as a party to those conversations as well, because there's just so many pieces, right? Like I think as a generation, right, that the new sort of the millennial generation, the Gen Z generations are poised to be some of the most saddled with debt, right? Like if it's student loans, if it's healthcare, there's so many. Not to say that that's exclusive to those generations, but trying to break into an industry, trying to access land, something that is so valuable at this point, especially right now. There's just so much kind of hanging over the heads of people that I think the narrative piece can really help sort of bolster that sort of presentation and support of those businesses. So that's really fantastic. I'm gonna move on.
Corey, you did yourself.
I did. Bad form. And so interjections sort of abound here. But so since Emma was talking here about, some of these personal credit pieces. Just wanted to kind of take a quick sidebar here around some of that personal credit and reporting piece, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, particularly even this graphic even. But so from a business advisor standpoint, and sort of coaching clients through this, because personal credit, especially with sole proprietors, people whose personal finances are often entangled with their business finances as well. This is a crucial piece, but it's a crucial piece anyway when you're approaching an institution for a loan, right? Because there is going to be that credit reporting piece that needs to be accounted for. But I think we understand as consumers, especially, that this credit reporting piece, the FICO score in particular, is a sort of cryptic moving target. It's kind of just this witch's brew, it seems like sometimes for the uninitiated, that some might even argue is by design. But it's unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm not sure, depending on how you look at it, is just very integral, again, to this lending landscape of which we are a part. So while not cut and dry, this just sort of illuminates here how those FICO scores are determined and, sort of generally and weighted. But so as business advisors working with these clients who are looking to access capital in the near future, especially, some of the things that we tend to focus on is just sort of advising clients to pay attention to their payment history, right? So these two top line items here, the payment history and the amounts owed, the most heavily weighted pieces, right? So we tend to sort of focus upon those for the obvious reasons. And that just sort of means payment history wise means just, making sure that, your paid accounts, your accounts were paid on time. The amounts owed piece is sort of more about the credit utilization idea there, which is like how much credit is actually being used of what you have available. But again, this is a real pinch point in some of those talks about or ideas around inequity within this system. Because just, by definition, less available credit or less overall credit, I should say, no matter what you use, you're going to generally have more credit utilization, right? Because you have less to work with. So those ratios a lot of times can be skewed towards higher credit limits or people who have access to those higher credit limits. But just some of the general points that we advise on here, the rule of thumb, I think, is just to sort of keep this credit utilization ratio less than 30%. But again, 30% of $500 looks very different from 30% of $5,000 or even $50,000. But just regardless in the system, it's just important to consider and implement, right, to have a plan to pay these debts down. Cash flow being, again, this huge piece to this puzzle for business owners. That's often the most major pinch point for a business's success, particularly in the first few years before those cash reserves are sort of really built up, hopefully, is just making sure that you're not sort of miring yourself and taking on too much in this revolving credit sphere, because it can also impact you in your ability to be able to pursue other funding sources later on. But that can be tough, right? It's tough for a lot of people to sort of maintain that. But some of the other pieces here is just sort of advising to avoid opening any new lines of credit when you're going to be seeking out funding opportunities in the near future, preparing for a loan, or sort of just kind of tending to your garden there, because more accounts over less time is going to be a negative impact on your credit score. And so it's just kind of this weird double-edged sword, right? But kind of going back to what Emma was saying before, I think the idea of knowing the story of your credit, particularly when you're approaching us with a funding request, is really a crucial piece to that puzzle. Because as Emma had stated before, it's not like we're just sort of blanketly turning people away based upon credit score alone. So just sort of being prepared to explain or have some sort of a narrative around any sort of derogatory marks or gaps in your credit report. Because as you often say, Emma, the data tells the story, right? And that's what you're looking at. Those numbers are going to tell that story. And so just understanding that from a consumer perspective, a business owner perspective, is a really important piece to that puzzle. Okay. I'm just going to here. Oh, also the free annual credit report. That's a great tool that I think we send out to our clients very regularly, just because it's something that wasn't always available, right? You just have to pay for your credit report, which is insane. But it's also just another example or substantiation of how it's expensive to be of the low wealth community sometimes. And so credit cards, all that being said, right? It's a vital part of small business and micro business cash flow. Again, it can be a really flexible resource for purchasing things like small equipment, ingredients, putting fuel in vehicles, you name it. It's sort of a great tool to sort of bridge those gaps in cash flow, but albeit on a smaller basis, I should say. And some other things important to note here, just from an advisory standpoint on this slide here, is just and just generally speaking, right, as a consumer, just understanding what APRs are, coaching people through what that actually looks like, understanding what your pay down strategy looks like, seeing how those fees and interest sort of accrue over time, and understanding what it looks like to pay your debts down over the course of 3 months or 6 months or 24 months, depending on what that situation looks like, right? Because it's very, very specific to the individual and those circumstances. I think other things that are, maybe not as important to consider, but are certainly can be of value is just the reward structure. Fee structure, very important, but reward structure can be something that can be of benefit if you do a lot of travel or things like that for your business. And I think also it's an interesting tool for repairing credit as well, from the vantage of secured credit cards, particularly. It can sort of help manage those APR rates, because they generally aren't as, they're not low interest rates, but they're a way to be able to break into or access that piece if you do have a history of derogatory marks on your credit history that will otherwise prevent you from accessing traditional credit cards as well. But always just to shop around for the best rates. And there's a little sidebar here to just be aware of things like predatory loans on off-farm income, which is often a circumstance for many, if not most farmers, small farmers. It's something that I think can be a really attractive thing sometimes. And that just goes for everybody, right? For people who are just experiencing a pinch in cash flow, something like a payday loan can be an attractive sort of thing to be able to help you get through that. But it can lead to a sort of vicious cycle. And it does sort of extract your wages and your wealth in a way that is it is nothing short of predatory. But just sort of reiterating here that it's really important just to approach this from a place of thoughtfulness in the active management of your credit just as a whole. Again, tending to that garden, because it can run away from you really fast. And I venture that perhaps some of us on this call, maybe I'm outing myself here, have been there. So, okay. So that was a lot. We covered a lot of territory here. And I think we've got just a little over a half an hour left here. We're going to just talk a bit about some of the other avenues that we engage with oftentimes in our advisory work, and I think just in our client engagement in general. This is just another little cheesy pun on seeding your farm or food business here, some microbeats. But just again, just sort of talking a little bit about some of the other resources that are out there, and sort of how those can also sort of dovetail into just a general approach when you're trying to represent your operation. So first and foremost, I think one of the things we hear the most about, and I would venture that many of you that work in sort of the nonprofit sphere can probably attest to this as well, that grants are a huge part of that, something that we get asked about a lot. But something that Alina, who is the supervisor in my department, often says, she also has a lot of grant writing experience, is that grants aren't really free money, right? It really depends upon a lot of factors, and it can really be a sap to your other resources, like your personal bandwidth. And also, I guess it depends upon how much you value your sanity. That's a joke that we have around here. They're also a really competitive resource, which I think that many of us have encountered before. They can be a heavy lift in terms of application time, even sort of post-grant reporting requirements and things like that. It can be really tough to manage, I think, for time-strapped farmers and small business entrepreneurs to kind of keep up with. And also sort of being able to sort of present a complete picture moving forward, right? Because you don't necessarily have the time to be able to dedicate to investing in this application. And there are people out there who do have resources to be able to dedicate to hiring a grant writer sometimes, right? And that's not to say that that's a really exclusive thing, but it can be a costly endeavor, right? Paying a professional rate, a professional hourly rate to contract somebody cannot be something that's viable for your own personal viability there. And sort of branching off of that a little bit too is just that the matching funds piece can be complicated for people as well. In kind is a great sort of option, I think, in terms of being able to sort of manage that and not have to invest too much in terms of initial capital. But that's not to say that, again, people who do have that sort of buffer, cash reserve are in, maybe could be in better circumstances to be able to appeal in that way. I think as well, something that I think, Emma, you talk about oftentimes here, I just want to bring you into this quickly, is that there seems to be, just based upon what it takes to apply for a grant, though, there seems to be some net benefit to having grant funding. And that doesn't just necessarily extend to things like having that additional buffer income, but it can also relate to the actual application process on the loan side of things, right?
Yeah, I think with all of these that you've laid out, the process to receiving any of these is fairly similar. And what we see oftentimes, especially with our early care and learning directors, is being able to go through the grant process is a strength of someone's application, is sort of a green flag for us. That somebody understands their business and can tell the story. It only bolsters an application. But if somebody hasn't gone through or doesn't have experience with grants, that doesn't negatively impact their application. But it is fairly similar. It's a really similar process.
So you're kind of saying that, like, just sort of understanding the nature of your business, right, and this is kind of, we're going to talk about this a little bit more, is really just the sort of crux of that conversation. And I think that also sort of extends to, particularly to this grant sphere, understanding what the ask is, right, what the objectives are of the grant and how your business kind of fits into that. Because I think a lot of times people, again, see this free money piece and they're like, oh my God, I need to jump on this. How can I kind of fit this in? But there are, strategic objectives that are kind of go along with those grant funding or requests for proposals that just to be aware of, and having that self-awareness around your business is key in sort of sussing out what is a good venture, a good use of your time, a good use of your resources versus something that is, as TLC likes to say, chasing waterfalls. Sorry, 90s kid. So yeah, just some other pieces here. Crowdfunding is something that I think I'm seeing a little bit more of in the business advisory spheres lately. People sort of using or utilizing this tool. It's a great tool to sort of fund projects generally, I think is something I see that a lot, and specific, maybe not necessarily in terms of operating capital, but if there is something specific that is attractive, that has marketability, I think, with a larger sort of base. And that can be something like an event. It can be something like, a structure or something like that. I think it's really less about things like, operating capital and equipment, but it definitely is something that I think we're sort of, we're seeing a little bit more of, particularly I think in agritourism as well. Again, this is something that has a lot of overlap with sort of marketing sensibilities as well. And that fits very nicely into the business planning piece, which is where you would sort of, house or represent those narrative pieces and your marketing plan and strategy. So sort of developing that business plan is a really good tool in sort of informing some of these other marketing initiatives as they, start to develop and evolve over time. And again, so something with the, other capital, I think it's really important as well. Something that Emma had mentioned is just understanding that a lot of these, equity partners and other sort of potentially interested parties, right, venture capital and the like, are wanting to look at that story too. They want to see numbers. I'm pretty sure of that. I'm no expert, but I'm pretty sure they want to see numbers, but they also want to be able to understand your story as well. And so that enthusiasm piece really can't be understated. But it's an enthusiasm that needs some substantiation, I think, as well. It needs to be very grounded in reality. Because, I think that people, entrepreneurs in general, tend to be people that are very optimistic, tend to be very, engaging and enterprising. So it definitely lends itself to this idea that, these entrepreneurs are their best advocates in terms of being able to sell their idea or inspire people to be enthusiastic about their story and their ideas. It's a really creative sort of process, but being able to sort of ground that in reality, I think, is something that, we try to concentrate on very much in the work that we do here in the Business Resource Center. As much as I really kind of love to get kind of wrapped up in people's stories sometimes as an anthropologist, it's totally something that I think needs to, it needs some fleshing out. It needs some bones around it in order to truly be successful. Just sort of touching on here, some other resources or avenues to sort of explore as an entrepreneur. This is, I have this slide for Halloween, but I think apples still apply for Thanksgiving, so I'm leaving it here. Maybe not bobbing for apples, but apples do. But so bobbing for apples in the balance sheet is just sort of a metaphor here for just sort of looking in your balance sheet to sort of establish or identify areas that could need some buttoning up. The balance sheet itself is a real-time sort of snapshot of your business's current position. It can be a little tough to project for startups. And so a budget is something that, many startup businesses kind of use in lieu of something like this, just to sort of have a loose approximation, hopefully not so loose approximation of your projected sort of expenses and income over a period of time, something that would be included in your business plan. But the balance sheet itself is something that just sort of represents on a granular level your asset structure, your accounts receivable, things like equity and that, which I think can be problematic sometimes from a bookkeeping standpoint, depending on what kind of system that you're using to represent this data. It's only as good as the information is you put in sometimes. And so before you approach a lender or any other sorts of funding opportunities, it's really important that you sort of look through that balance sheet and understand what it's saying to you. And then I think also understanding where things maybe are sticking out to you as like, what's that? Oftentimes we see things around, just sort of accounting best practices around, like, I guess, sort of things that aren't hitting the correct accounts, that aren't really set up in the system. Things like QuickBooks can really set you up for a bit of a whirlwind at the end of the year if you've been tagging things to the wrong account. And then it's like you're in December and you're like, oh, I'm going to just approach a lender for a loan application, and you've got things that are sort of not in the places that they need to be. So that's one sort of element of cleaning up that balance sheet, but it also includes things like we talked about before, reducing debts prior to sort of soliciting an ask, collecting on things like accounts receivable to reduce that, just to show that you're able to sort of, recoup and maintain those systems and those terms of your business. It's all about sort of flexing and showing your management capabilities there. But it's also, I think, a metaphor for, the sort of frugality funding too, and just sort of raising capital through your budget, I think as well is something else that I think it sort of represents. But so again, this is just another story to be told here, and just knowing and understanding what's on there, and just being able to speak to that same way that you would with something on your credit report. Okay.
Can I jump in and just?
Oh,
really
yes.
emphasize- I'm so sorry.
No.
So a point that you made that I just really want to emphasize is on accounts receivable. When lenders are looking at, we look at a balance sheet just as much as we look at a profit and loss or a projection or even taxes. And knowing, we'll really look at accounts receivable 60, 90 days out and ask you about it. So if you do know when you're applying for a term loan or a line of credit, if you do know that those accounts will be on there and they are past 60 or 90, just be prepared to chat with us about that. And another point on inventory, and these two, inventory and accounts receivable, are really applicable when you're applying for a line of credit. Knowing when you take the snapshot of your balance sheet and your inventory is what it is in that moment, we'll ask you, is that a good picture of what your inventory looks like annually or not? So just be prepared to chat a little bit about if your inventory fluctuates throughout the year, if it's perishables or not. Just tossing in those tidbits about some things that lenders look at in a balance sheet.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And I think also mentioning things like, one of the things I think that is really a pinch point for a lot of burgeoning entrepreneurs too, is just understanding even how to set up that, like understanding inventory, for instance, I think is another conversation to have, but perishables and inventory and bookkeeping, boy, that could be a session. Okay. So this is goofy here, but anyway. So this is just a little digression here around something else that we see a lot in people who are approaching us, I think, for an ask here. And that can include things like private gifts and family loans and things like that. And it's also something I think people utilize in the startup phases and, throughout the life of their business intermittently as needed. I think that it's important to sort of note here in terms of conversations that we've had around this here at BCLF, it's also, aside from it being a flexible and low or maybe even no interest option, depending on the circumstances here for some folks. But I think particularly around new American communities, BIPOC and, women-led communities as well, tend to statistically rely upon this avenue perhaps more often. It's not in some great, we're not talking huge figures necessarily here, but it often is a resource that kind of is reflective of this community trust over institutional skepticism, I guess is the best way to put it. And so people, coming from the low wealth communities are often starting with this, less personal savings and equity, and are, again, wary perhaps to engage with this institutional system. And so it is something that I think we do see some of. But I think it's important to note too that while this is a common and obviously viable avenue for many aspiring business owners, farmers and the like, it's also perhaps a wise consideration from an advisory perspective, just in terms of supporting entrepreneurs and meeting them where they're at, right? Just as we would in any other circumstance, that maybe we don't want to reinforce the normalcy necessarily. It's an avenue, but I've heard other institutions and people that work in finance refer to this as like the bank of mom and dad. There's always the bank of mom and dad. I've heard that in the advising scape before, and I think just from a sort of personal and subjective standpoint. And this could just be from my own sort of advisory perspective here. I think that could be a problematic assumption to make. I think making any sort of assumption about somebody's circumstances and background when you're in a coaching or an advising capacity is a dangerous thing, or it can be a hurtful thing. And sort of building that relationship being as important as it is, just sort of being cognizant of that. And I think, we can still shoot straight with our clients at the end of the day, but also sort of respecting those individual backgrounds and journeys and experiences, because life is wild, isn't it? I think also sort of when you're engaging with this particular thing, and I think this really extends to the more official family loan, private loan spheres, should there be a traditional or a more official agreement kind of laid out there, there are some implications there. I mean, even if you're just borrowing money from a friend, right? There's, without that sort of additional layer of bureaucracy, I think there's potential impacts on your personal and working relationships that I think as advisors, it's important to sort of convey to our clients before they take that leap, if we're able to sort of be there at that point. But so as with everything else we've discussed so far in this session, I think that Emma, kind of really did a good job of sort of preempting this here. The best bet in securing any type of capital is to just like know your ask, know your business, understand the granular details of your business, be able to represent that enthusiastically, and get your sort of terms and expectations dialed in, even as awkward as that might feel in the moment. But also, I just wanted to just offer a quick digression here. So as a floriculturalist in tropicals, there's a lot going on in the background here. And if anybody wants to kind of contribute to the conversation here on any of these genuses or even common names, we'll take common names. We've had some arguments back and forth about what exists back here. So I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are as well. So just to touch upon, again, this advisory piece here, it can be a really crucial role in sort of supporting clients through this process, but just cheekily here, just understanding where the source is coming from here. I understand, I'm very self-aware, but so just sort of outlining here the, the sort of stages of intersection where advisory and even lending, right, can sort of play a role in the success of a business and supporting businesses. And I think it's something that it's safe to say that many of us that are on this call today are sort of engaged with on a perennial and perhaps rote level at this point. But so just to highlight some of those things, things at the very beginning stages, right, of a project or a business, a startup phase, establishing some goals, right, guiding clients through that development, and conducting, I like to say, sort of strengths, challenges, and opportunities instead of SWOT, because I think that can have a little bit of a negative connotation sometimes. And developing, just some preliminaries for a business plan. But then that obviously dovetails and moves forward into the planning phases. And that can also sort of parallel some bits around, shoring up your personal finance pieces, helping sort of establish strategy around the business needs, developing a runway, getting those financial pieces really dialed in. So what to ask, like what you need, right, is really pertinent in sort of understanding what you're going to have to ask at some point, what you need to raise, however you decide to do that or able to do that. And again, this could go down to the very detail work of helping people establish tools to be able to manage their finances. That's something that we do a lot here. Excel is just, I dream about Excel for what that's worth, because we develop a lot of tools here for financial management tools, building profit and loss statements, building budgets, building cash flow tools and the like. And then I think it's also really important to support clients through sort of the navigation of these funding request processes. Something that Emma had stated, I think it might have been in our last presentation of this, is that it's okay to bring an advisor to a meeting with a loan officer. It's actually something that I think that is welcomed, it seems like a lot of times. I think it's also, we're very familiar with that sort of interaction and that interplay. But if there is somebody that's outside of that organization that you would like to bring into that conversation, I think it's safe to say that most lenders particularly would be, happy to sort of support clients through that, because it's a resource. it can really help sort of build that relationship, and it can help give confidence, I think, as well, to clients as they're sort of navigating that process. And again, that sort of goes down to the support role as a nice, neat little package, because having this piece available to you as you're sort of navigating these really like sort of vulnerable and difficult, taxing processes from an intellectual level and an emotional level as well. Getting that confidence and that empowerment is really invaluable in negotiating anything in this life, but particularly around some of the uncomfortable bits with accessing these capital systems. And so here we kind of are sort of trying to bring this all together here and just say that all of these things are related. These different systems and these different resources that a lot of our clients and our borrowers are sort of trying to engage with or presently engaged with require this sort of this summary piece, this representative piece, in order to be able to move forward with any sort of ask in the funding sphere. And so that can include things, or it should include things like your business plan, budget and projections, again, the financial statements piece, meaning your balance sheet, profit and loss, so that, the things are evident, the state of your business. If you do not have that available, obviously the projections are an apt and viable substitute for that. Understanding your credit report having your credit report doesn't, have to be a part of this equation, but understanding what's on there so that when you're approached by a lender specifically, what's on there, and be prepared to answer questions around that. But again, there's something to be said for that personal narrative piece as well. Being able to represent yourself, your professional experience, and it can include something like a resume, but being able to sort of communicate what your experiences are and what you bring to the table from a management standpoint really will be a good sort of selling point, and I think a predictor for success as well. As Emma puts all the time, enthusiasm is also, I think, pretty key in this sort of situation, where people want to see that you're excited about the thing that you're engaged in, and they're going to want to be involved in that process. A lot of the work that we do here is we get very excited going to committee where we're sort of talking about the details of a loan. We love to be in the Business Resource Center a part of that underwriting process in the way that we get to see how businesses are sort of being represented, and being able to sort of provide some feedback and commentary and reciprocity throughout that process, because it's huge. And sort of lastly here, just to sort of synergize some of the things that we've talked about, because we have talked about a lot, we've been talking a long time. I guess sort of, some of the granular pieces here that really we need to focus on here as advisors and as lenders, I think, in this profession, is just to have a handle on that portfolio, develop that portfolio with an advisor, or if you feel confident to do that on your own. It's still a really, really important piece to this puzzle. It's crucial. Understanding what research or what opportunities are out there. And again, advisors can help you through that process as well. But that requires you knowing when and how to sort of ask for help. But again, I think this sort of venue here at Farm to Plate is a really great example of what sort of can come of these sorts of network opportunities. I think they're very fruitful in sort of encouraging dialogue, conversation about the different vantages that we're all coming from here. And I think that serves to benefit our entrepreneurial communities summarily. But then also knowing your rights, right? This is something that is, I think it can be a little bit tricky, but understanding what sort of recourse is out there if you have felt like you have been unfairly treated in these systems, because that exists. I hope that we've sort of driven that home, maybe not beaten everybody over the head with it. But so I guess to summarize here at the bottom of the slide, that in this challenging landscape and acknowledging that challenging landscape exists, the best approach is just through that sort of knowledge and preparedness piece. And we hope that, through the work that we do, we can help with that, but in a way that gives our clients agency as well. Because it's not easy raising money, especially if you're starting with less to begin with, or if you have limited exposure to the systems that sort of, frame out this whole process. Because, as owners, you're your own greatest asset in sort of representing the business. But there's so much that I think that we can do in these support roles, and that extends as well to the lending industry as well, to just help our clients to be able to put their best foot forward and get them the most money that they can, the best rates. So just some resources here. We talked about some of these things throughout. I'm going to be able to, if anybody's interested in any of these things, we can obviously email them as well. We have the email list for the attendees here, but just, again, that brief history of redlining is just, I think, a really fascinating and unfortunate little bit of history there that I think it's important to sort of be apprised of, and sort of understanding the context of capital systems as they exist today, but then also just some other resources in terms of what your recourse is. Again, if you feel like you have been unfairly treated, some resources around accessing your credit report. And then also, some little bits on being able to find that a CDFI that maybe is closer to you. And some credit card bits too as well. So I think we're going to try and turn it over to a Q&A. If there are any questions, I encourage people to put them in the chat. Emma, can you see the chat?
I can see the chat. There are no questions currently.
Okay. Well, if anybody wants to unmute as well, you're more than welcome to do that. I think that, or if you want to raise your hand or something like that.
I'm happy to jump in. Sorry you can't see my face there. This is Betsy Hands with the High Meadows Fund. I guess of all the pieces that you shared, the Kickstarter is the most intriguing that we've seen growth and development over the last a number of years. And I'm curious how often you see that with the business owners that are, when you're reviewing their balance sheets or advising them on their opportunities. And I guess I'd love to talk a little bit more about that one, because I think I just recently received an email from a friend who was using Kickstarter to help support a BIPOC business, and she raised $5,000 for that business. And so for those of us that, you've mentioned a lot about the challenges with women-owned and minority-owned, Black, Indigenous, people of color led. To me, that might be the most revolutionary way to just get capital to small entrepreneurs in Vermont. So I thought if you could talk to that a little bit more, it'd be helpful.
Sure. Yeah. I think and Emma, feel free to jump in as well. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to just jump in there, but I think it's something, I wouldn't say that we see it terribly often at this point. However, I will say that there are circumstances, or I'm seeing more interest around it at this point. I can cite a couple of examples where there have been successful campaigns launched. That being said, I think that, like you have mentioned, there's a lot more buzz around it these days. I think people are really willing and eager to sort of tap into other systems that don't have, that are so much more subjective, and allow them to be sort of creative and take ownership of their story in a way that engaging with a traditional lender, or even us, a CDFI, sort of, those barriers exist. That's the nature of things. So I think it's a really, like you said, very revolutionary tool that we're only really starting to see the, I guess that the benefits or the impact of. But I would venture to say that we're going to see a lot more of it. I think people are just sort of are willing to put themselves out there in a way and have access to technical resources in a way that they haven't before. And that's not to say that that's equitable across demographics, because I think that it really is something that we, especially in Vermont, have a little bit of catching up to do here in terms of, like broadband access and things like that. But regardless of that fact, it's something that is certainly becoming more important in terms of the conversations that we're having around capital access. And I think people are getting really good at marketing too. I have to say, one of the sort of like, I think it's a double-edged sword sometimes in terms of like farm and food businesses, because it seems like it can put a lot of undue pressure on already taxed business owners to have to do their own marketing and do it in a way that is, sometimes very romantic and maybe idealistic. It's also, I think, really honed in a skill for people that are, engaged with that regularly and can commit to that and have access to the resources that make that feasible for them. It can be a really great way to sort of flex that marketing muscle, and it pays dividends down the road. But yeah, I think to your question, I've rambled here, but I think to your question, you're going to see a lot more of this, pertinent especially to things that are like specific to projects and things like that. And I think it's going to have huge impacts across demographic lines, but it's a more, I guess, egalitarian approach to raising capital, which obviously stands to benefit demographics who have been traditionally underserved by other systems.
Yeah, I know Christina wants to go. I'll just say it's a sort of a challenge to us all if we're not familiar or we haven't used it a lot to promote underserved businesses. I'm really rethinking when we talk about creative ways to finance these businesses. The barriers, the structural barriers that you've identified are just so real that we need to, I guess, funders, white-led lenders need to come up with a way to promote things that are more supportive and less extractive in this space. So anyway, I just want to encourage that conversation amongst other people here, and I'll let Christina ask her question.
Yes, and just before we jump into that, I want to say absolutely. And I think that as advisors, right, this is a real opportunity for us to jump into this conversation more concretely, because it's a way for us to be able to provide a very valuable service, right? There's a direct like cause and effect here, but we have those resources available. We tend to have that expertise, and we have access to the the technology to be able to either help people through that process, to be able to empower them to do it themselves, or to be able to sort of not necessarily do it for them, but in some circumstances you can do that. So yeah, I think the advisory piece, especially as this sorts of the system sort of evolves, is going to be crucial. Yeah, so that's all. Sorry, Kristen or Christina.
No problem. Yeah, and I don't really necessarily have a specific question, but I wanted to thank you both, Corey and Emma, for this presentation, and just share that from my role at the Vermont Agency of Agriculture is primarily as a grantor, and I really appreciated your comparing of the kind of pros and cons of receiving a grant for certain businesses, and we really are trying to do a better job of handing off folks that aren't a great fit for a grant or applied for a grant and didn't receive it to the right business advising opportunities. It's not really our role to play business advising, but we really do want to do a better job of kind of triaging and making sure that people know that a line of credit or a low interest loan or a loan from a community organization might actually be a better fit for them than a grant, without, and not just saying, well, sorry, your project isn't a good fit for this grant. See ya, which I don't think we would, we've never done that, but it can still feel that way if we're just saying like, here's a list of things on our website.
Yeah, I mean, that's huge. If that's something that, that is going to sort of start to kind of take shape. Yeah, I suppose that I'll speak for my department and say that, we would be happy to sort of field some of those advisory requests and see what sort of fits we have. I don't know, Emma, if you have any to contribute there, product wise. Uh-oh. Oh, no.
You're muted right now, Emma. It looked like, yeah,
There's a connecting to audio thing
yeah,
going on
looks
right
like there's an
now.
audio. There you go.
There you are. Yay.
Oh.
No.
Oh, then
What's that?
she muted her.
What's happening? All right, fine. But yeah, I think that would be a fantastic sort of avenue to explore, Christina. So we appreciate that. And it's awesome. The grants that are offered by Agency of Agriculture, we're sort of engaging with the Working Lands grants right now here. And yeah, I mean, it's a very robust landscape there. I think that's, incredible work that you all are doing there as well. All have to support these communities. Are there any other, wait, hold on. Do we have any other questions in here? I don't think so. Oh, Emma was able to put something in the chat though. Thank you, Emma. Yes, sort of reiterating that we are able to offer these business advisory services to pre-loan folks. And so that would mean people who aren't yet ready to necessarily ask for a loan, but they are sort of brainstorming a loan or other opportunities as well. There's lots of room for intersection there, but sort of the work that we do at that level is sort of helping them maybe even develop that ask, understanding what their needs are is really what that comes down to, and that can be in terms of determining runway for a startup, or it could mean sort of what do you need to sort of encompass, what are your needs over the course of the next 1 to 3 years, for instance, in terms of equipment and any sort of scaling, right? And we can help sort of inform the conversation around that as well, as to whether or not that makes sense. We aren't necessarily just here to sell loans, but right, it's about sort of really sort of helping clients evaluate what's best for them. Oh, Elijah.
Just a note that it's fine to carry. No, it's fine that we're over time and to field some additional questions. Just that we do need to at some point be back at 11:15. So just wanted to note that, so people are happy to stick around, ask questions, and then just make sure we get back to things at 11:15.
Sorry about that. Yeah, we can talk over here. Okay, so it's my Long Island accent. Anyway, so Elijah.
Hey, thanks. I just have a really quick, pragmatic, speaking of referrals, thinking about farm and forest-based businesses. If we're referring over to you guys, is Bonnie the best with the, is she like the first point of contact we should send folks to, or is there someone else, the business advising team, who should we make their initial foray with?
I think I'm out. Yay, you've got to be, yeah. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Bonnie is the best. I love that. Yeah, she really is a great person. She'll filter, at least for businesses, for housing and community facilities, that goes to a separate administrator, but Bonnie can filter them all of the inquiries, and she can even flag someone if they need TA or are ready for an application. Yeah.
Yes, that is one workflow. Like, so if Bonnie gets an application and it's sort of ascertained at that stage that they would benefit from some services from the Business Resource Center, at that point it would get sort of fielded to our department. But there is also, and I'm not going to say that this is the best way to do it, but we are available as well. The Director of Business Resources is a kind of a hub for fielding some of that external advisory request as well. That's Alina Gustafsson. Okay, are there any other questions?
I would chime in with one if we have another moment.
Sure.
Can you hear me okay? Sorry, I don't have video, but this is Casey. And I just wanted to build on your all's presentation. Thank you. And also on Betsy's question, reflecting on the need for flowing funding to BIPOC communities in Vermont. I'm just curious if you all have had any success in, I come from a lending institution as well, and it can be really hard to actually change the demographics of a loan portfolio. And so if you all have had any success with that, or if there is a need for any kind of different loan products or gaps in the funding network that we as a community can start to try to address, more flexible funding products, for instance, to help fill those gaps.
Emma, would you like to talk about this one? Oh, no. That's funny. If you can't connect, I think Ben is on this call too. I might ask Ben to unmute here because he's actually the sort of the ambassador here for something that we're calling the Justice Forward Fund, which I believe hasn't yet been launched yet, but it is something that is in the works. But Ben, if you are on this call, would you mind unmuting?
Yeah, morning, everybody. To the questioner's point, yeah, I think we have kind of historically struggled to change the overall demographics of our loan portfolio. So kind of as a result of that and some other things, over the past couple of months, we've been developing a new loan product that we're hoping is much more accessible, kind of lowering a lot of the barriers of entry to the credit industry, and basically making it so since we haven't officially launched this, I'm not sure exactly how much I'm supposed to be disclosing, but kind of getting rid of some things like application fees, collateral requirements, making kind of tweaks to kind of what I think a lot of people in the credit industry were think of as given or as kind of some of the baseline requirements for loans. I think we're kind of trying to rethink that a little bit. So we are trying to launch that new fund, which is intended to be a non-extractive fund, lower than kind of what the current market interest rates are, sort of stuff. And I think we're trying to launch that, in the next month or so. So I'm sure there will be a big VCLF marketing launch for that, but as of yet, we haven't officially moved forward with that.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, Ben is actually one of my fellow advisors here in the Business Resource Center. So we're lucky. I'm glad you were on that call because you speak to that. He's very much engaged with this, with the development of this product and this work. And so I think he's, aside from Emma on this call, the best person to speak to that. So that's amazing. Thank you, Ben. Are there any other questions that anybody might have? Feel free to unmute, raise your hand. We do have another minute, maybe. I'm sure we're gonna have to jump off though, Jake.
No, no worries. Do not let me stop people from asking questions. This is great.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll just give another minute or so and then if anybody, the other thing is too, I'm just gonna throw up, it's not the right expression, but I'm gonna throw up here, but this is our, oh no, my picture didn't. Oh, that's a bummer. That was such a cool picture. For some reason, it's not showing. Anyway, this is our contact information. If you do feel, have the urge to reach out to us, this is how you reach us directly. Yeah, suppress your excitement here, but there's also some other sort of avenues to be able to connect with us here, and that includes our socials. But yeah, feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. And I think I also probably will be sending a couple of resources out in just an email form after this call as well.
Corey, I'm sorry, none of the contact information is showing. It's still showing us the Q&A page. I think you may be sharing only that program specifically.
Oh, well, it should still be, hold on one second. Oh, I closed the window. Hold on one second. That would be helpful.
To drop it in the chat.
Yeah, I can do that. I can do that as well. It's just a bummer. There was a really cute picture on there. I think I lost the connection at some point. Anyway, I will send our contact information after this call if that's helpful. But yeah, I think we got to hop off now. I just want to thank everybody for coming and sort of chatting with us today and listening to us spiel for this time. And I think we look forward to engaging with all of you in the future. Bye.
Thanks, Corey and Emma. Have a good day.
Thanks, you too, Caitlin.
Bye.